Well, thank you again for joining us today. The presentation today is the world of change has changed forever, and that we really do need to think differently about what's happening in the area of change today. Uh, I think change has been really a process, almost like process reengineering has, and organizations are starting to invest a great deal in change for a lot of obvious reasons. But moving forward, I really believe that change or change management will go away, and that change will actually have to become just part of the DNA of organizations and what they do and how they run their businesses. And today's discussion is going to be largely about how do we start to make that transition, and what's driving that, and what are the methodologies and the things that we should be thinking about as we go through that. So we really do need to think differently. I love this picture because it really does show that almost anything's possible. And as we start talking through change and some of the new ways of thinking, that's an area that we're really going to have to hold open for ourselves. So why do we need to think differently? And what's really changed in our environment that's making us actually have to change? Well, largely it's being driven by technology and the speed of technology advancements. Really, if you look at all the different logos that are on the page here today, they represent a lot of the different types of companies that are primarily in the HR and recruiting area. But technology is being driven by companies, across the board, from semiconductor to video, processors, and so forth. And those technologies are starting to come together to form new products and services at an exponential rate. In fact, the US patent filings have actually taken a hockey stick growth curve, decade on decade, since the 60s, when computerization really started, up to current. So that's growing at an exponential rate. And that's starting to formulate a lot of the newer technology developments that are going on. On the other side, mergers and acquisitions have actually escalated as well, hockey stick growth. And that's escalating because organizations can't possibly keep up with in-house development. And so they're having to buy technology. So it's really starting to show the escalation of change that's happening in the world. So what does that mean? So we've got technology that's starting to advance. Well, here's what's actually happening to our organizations. As technology is accelerating in development, it's increasing the number of products and services and new competition entering the market. As those new products and services are entering the market, it's actually increasing customer expectations. So as an example, if I go to one website and I'm able to do a certain task or function very easily on that, as I go to a different service provider, it could even be our Department of Motor Vehicles, then our expectation is that we should be able to do the same things. And customer needs and requirements then start to shift. The other thing that starts to shift then is really our workforce requirements, because our workforces now need to be able to deal with those new technologies. Also, the new technologies have now automated out a lot of the low-level tasks in our businesses, which have only left the kind of higher value, more challenging tasks for our people. So again, some of those people are not equipped to deal with that. A lot of the things that are happening from that point too, we'll talk about in a bit, which is actually changing the job market themselves. And so people are really having a challenge keeping up with all of this. Now, as workforce requirements are start to shift, new technologies are being developed to force that, and it ends up being this kind of endless cycle of technology development that we're in the middle of. There will be no slowdown. As technologies develop, it's making it easier and easier to develop new technologies. And so this is a thing that we are going to live with for the rest of our lives. So what's the impact on people and organizations? Well, currently we're seeing, whether it's in Australia or in the U.S., we're seeing a 20 to 25% of our current workforce is suffering from some type of mental health challenge, largely due to stress. We've got 40% of jobs will not exist in 15 years. And this is a lot of different people have validated this in different ways, but they're all coming in at around that mark. And that may mean that a certain job will be completely gone, while other jobs may be just, adjusted largely in what they do, and the requirement of the person doing that job is going to need to shift. But if you can just imagine, just in 15 years, what were you doing 15 years ago, and what's changed in 15 years? Well, for one, it might be bank tellers and being replaced with ATMs as an example. Everything was done inside the bank. Today it's ATMs, but actually now the banks are actually being faced with another huge challenge, which is that nobody's using the ATMs. We're actually not using nearly as much cash. People are going up and using debit cards and credit cards to make all of their transactions, which is reducing the need for the ATM. So that's even starting to shift in the way that we work with technology. So those are the kind of evolutions that are starting to happen. How are people going to actually retool? That's going to be a huge challenge that we're going to face. How do we get people to upskill and deal with those issues? People are having to run faster and faster and faster, and the consequences to having to get more done is that people are not having time to really think about even quality of life. Their levels of emotional intelligence are decreasing because they don't have time to even think about being present any longer. So that starts to affect our leadership capability and really our functioning overall in life. Organizations literally have to do more with less. There are huge restructurings going on, across the globe in our large organizations, which is starting to change the dynamic of the relationship between the employee and the organization. And organizations really no longer can set a strategy, work that strategy for 3 to 5 years, reset, and continue to work in that 3 to 5 year mark. That's not to say it's not important to continue to look forward, but things are changing so quickly now that those kinds of adjustment periods no longer work. It really is almost continuous now, which means organizations have to change continuously. And when organizations are used to building infrastructures and investing large amounts of capital in establishing those infrastructures, how do you start to change with flexibility? Cloud technologies have helped that. Again, another change that the world is dealing with. Because what do you do with the legacy technology? How do we work? How do we start to drive and think about return on investment any longer? And this could go on and on and on. We could probably do a whole webinar just on the impact of change. So why not use current change models? We got all this change going on. Why will the current change models not be effective as we move forward? Well, let me start by saying that, whether it's, Cotter's 8 steps or Norton and Kaplan's balanced scorecard, or it's Bob Miles, my former partner's accelerated corporate transformation methodology. Many of those, actually, I think all 3 of those were developed out of Harvard University back when Bob Miles came out of Harvard and went and worked with Jack Welch in the turnaround at GE back in the 80s. And they're just building on that same original work, and continuing to refine and build on that. But a lot of that stuff all came from that same area. It's still the same thought process. So as we start to look at all of these different models, and there's many more than the 3, those seem to be the 3 kind of largest ones that are being utilized out there. The record of success has been dismal. Survey after survey is showing somewhere around a 70% failure rate in change interventions across organizations. That's left organizations really with a very low level of confidence in their ability to successfully go through a change initiative. That's a huge issue because without that level of confidence that they could actually be successful in it, they're not going to do it when it's necessary. They're going to hold off. They're looking at an ROI on these things. What's it going to cost us overall? How long is it going to take us? And in many cases, they can't justify it, and then it's business as usual, and it's justified from that. When we're facing the kind of change and the speed of change that we have today, how do you actually deal with that? The processes themselves, these methodologies were built primarily on a linear and time set structure. So when you look at the speed of change, similar to what we talked about earlier, how do you actually use a process that's linear in its thinking and its steps and how you go through the process, and that it happens in certain intervals? Working in large change initiatives today, with one of the larger firms, they're going to quote somewhere around an 18-month and multi-million-dollar price tag to go through change. I don't think organizations have the ability or the appetite for that, and anything that's going to take 18 months, they should have gone through probably 3, 4, 5 iterations in that same time period to keep up with the change that we're actually experiencing. So old models are not currently equipped, not that they couldn't be adjusted, but not currently equipped to deal with that. The structures that we've been operating in and that these models are built on is a command and control structure. So many of them are actually stepping through organizations and assuming the level of authority in the organization in a command and control fashion. But today we need new models. The people in our workforces today don't respond well to command and control. It's also proven not to be as effective in generating high performance in organizations or teams. So command and control really doesn't work. It's a fallback, and I think short of organizations really being successful in new models, it's been the default. These structures are based on that. It's not going to work moving forward. That's the third reason. And then the last reason is really ideology, that they are IQ-based methodologies working with economics and again, not that we don't look at economics in these things. Certainly you need to in a macro perspective. But as you work through things, the way in which IQ was integrated into the methodologies does not account for the emotive elements that need to be tended to today. And it's been an absent in business up to this point. It's starting to become more of a trend today to bring the emotive elements in, like emotional intelligence. And it's sorely needed, and it's absolutely essential if we're going to build the resilience to actually be able to move through change quickly. So organizations moving forward are going to have to literally integrate change into their DNA. It needs to be part of just the way that they do business. This will look a lot like process reengineering. Process reengineering, for 10 or 15 years, consultancies were making a fortune selling their services and helping organizations re-engineer their processes for efficiencies. Today, you don't really hear much about it. Today, organizations just know how to do it. They've learned how to do it over time. Well, this will be true in change management as well, although it's going to happen in a lot shorter period of time than it took us to do that with process reengineering. It may be more like 5 to 10 years rather than 10 to 20 years that we experienced previously. So what's the next answer then? So if the old models don't work, what's the new model? The new model is more of a hybrid model, but it's certainly built on 3 primary pillars, which we've coined really as emotional agility. So in emotional agility, the 3 pillars are purpose, and in purpose, it's aligning the organization's purpose with the roles of the organization and the individual's purpose, which we'll get into here more in a minute. But purpose is or should be aligned or should be the company's vision. itself. It should align to the brand promise that the organization is making, and the internal brand of the organization. All of those should be consistent and either aligned to or be the purpose of the organization. A growth mindset or open mindset, and we'll talk again more in detail on this one as well. This is based on a lot of the work that Carol Dweck did, a professor at Stanford University, where she did a lot of research around the education of children, and the children that actually had mindsets where they thought they could learn and that they were smart actually excelled in learning. The children that felt that they were stupid and therefore fixed in their intelligence level had a very difficult time learning and didn't do as well in school. So a growth mindset, and if we're going to live in a world of continuous change, we have to be continuously learning. We have to build in to the values of our organizations and the DNA of the organization that we not only can learn, but we're going to be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn faster and better than anybody else. It'll be a core element in the way organizations change moving forward. And lastly is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is critical, and it is clearly our way to measure, develop, and manage the emotive elements of our organization moving forward. And it'll be integrated into every aspect, from our recruiting to our L&D programs and our individual development. And in the end, emotions drive people, people drive performance. So if we can tend to, in fact, there's a direct correlation here, which we'll talk about. If we can tend to the emotions of our people, we can actually substantially increase performance of our organizations. Now, why is all this important? Well, I'll start with, there's a number of reasons we'll get into. I'll start with motivation. And what was really interesting, this is based on work that was done by Dan Pink, and much of the research that I think he pulled together came out of the London School of Economics and some research that was done by the US Federal Bank. And the outcome of that work that he did and the research that he found was that the workforce today basically wants three things to drive motivation. They want autonomy, mastery of their craft, and purpose. So if you break that down, the autonomy really is the structure and leadership of the organization. They want to have a collaborative environment to work in, and they want inspirational leadership. The mastery is the growth mindset. They want to be able to continue to learn and develop and grow, and purpose is our third pillar. So what the workforce is actually asking for to drive motivation aligns to the three pillars of emotional agility. So what's your purpose? And as you start to look at purpose, I love this quote by the founder of The Body Shop, which is, "Be courageous. It's the only place left uncrowded." And people have a hard time with purpose. What is your purpose? What are you on this earth to achieve? And I wanted to share a quick story of myself so you can get a little bit of an idea of what purpose is. For an organization, purpose may be very different in what they're accomplishing for society, as an example, or for their customer base. From an individual perspective, I can tell you for me specifically, I always thought that my purpose was to help organizations and individuals increase performance and grow. And I've done that in my whole life in a number of different ways, from executive positions in organizations to consulting. And it wasn't until just a couple of months ago I was working with a master trainer at 6 Seconds, and she was challenging me on my purpose. She said, "John, that's not your purpose." And I was just so adamant. It's like I just knew that was my purpose. That's what I'm here to do. And she said, John, that's not your purpose. Why is your purpose? Why do you do that? Why is that important to you? And a light bulb kind of went off in my head in that moment. And it was actually, I just want to bring value. It's that simple. So your purpose as an individual is simple. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be something that is hugely philanthropic and saving the world. It can be something that simple. Now, while my purpose is I want to bring value, I bring value by helping people and organizations increase performance and growth. So it links, and I do that with a set of tools. I think I cover a little bit of that in one of the future slides. Now, what really becomes important, though, is that we're starting to align the organization's purpose with the purpose of the roles of the organization with the individual's purpose, right? So I've got a middle step in there, which is the role of the individual. So as an example, if I'm going to be a salesperson in an organization, my purpose is going to be very important that the purpose of the organization is meaningful and something that I can attach to. And the organization has to hold my role as a salesperson such that I can live into that purpose. So if the organization is saying that their purpose, as an example, is to bring financial well-being to their customers, and I'm selling financial services products, so my role is such that I need to sell and hit certain metrics and certain numbers, and the products don't necessarily bring value. They bring financial value to the company, but not financial security to the customer. That's going to be very hard for me to live into. On the other hand, if the role does align from a purpose perspective and I am selling those products, then it aligns to my individual purpose. Now you start driving huge intrinsic motivation. Another word from an organization perspective you could think about is cause. What's the cause of the organization? And a lot of the transformation projects or engagements that I've worked in over the years, really successful ones were ones where the organization did have this cause. And it could be kind of the David and Goliath thing. It's a small company fighting the big companies, and the employees associate to that. One organization I was involved with years ago was bringing family communications. And that was the purpose, was that they really wanted to bring communications to the family. Today it's commonplace. Back then it wasn't. That was the purpose, and people could just associate to that and align to that. And today, again, it's commonplace. So aligning that becomes critical. So let's jump over now from purpose to growth mindset. Confucius, I think, really said this best. He who says he can and he who says he can't, both are usually right. The fixed or the growth mindset is exactly that. The fixed mindset is he who says he can't. And this comes from family values. You could be growing up and your peers told you were stupid. Somehow through life, you got this idea that you're stupid, or you've got the little voice on your shoulder now reminding you continuously that you're not good enough, that you're stupid, whatever it is, that you can't learn, that your IQ is fixed. You know, you hear that a lot as well. All of these things are adding up to I'm where I'm at, and that's all there is. A growth mindset is very different. A growth mindset says that actually I can learn anything and I can do anything. And that's the work that Carol Dweck has done, has validated that statistically. And when you start to think about organizations in working in declaration that they're going to go achieve something that's great, there's a belief in that. When you look at leaders, great leaders that inspire people to go do great things, whether it's invent and develop or just bring to market the next new thing, they're so passionate about it. And if you remember in emotional intelligence language, that emotions are contagious. And when people are passionate and people have that belief system, that's contagious. Organizations mirror the leadership. The leadership has that passion, the people come with them. The growth mindset starts to enable people to believe that they actually can achieve it, that they actually can learn, that they actually can change. It's critical in the way that organizations are going to operate and change in the future. It's probably the area I've got the fewest slides here on, probably the most important. It's going to be a critical piece, again, of culture and learning and development programs, hiring programs as we move forward. Okay, the third pillar, emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is really kind of five primary areas in EI itself. But what feeds EI is a lot of new development in neuroscience. And we're learning more and more about the brain and how the brain works, which is helping us start to understand how we can develop people more effectively and how people can become more self-aware and self-manage. It's mindfulness. And I know the word is kind of the guruism feel to it the whole bit. Basically, if you think of it, of presence and focus. It's presence and focus. So from a leadership perspective, this becomes important. Now, we could do a whole webinar on mindfulness and the value of brain functioning as you bring it back into neuroscience and the effects on that, increasing decision-making capability, your ability to navigate through challenging situations and so forth are all affected through that. Those feed into emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is five primary areas: self-awareness, self-regulation or self-management, motivation, which is linking back to purpose again, empathy, which is not, that your ability to, feel bad about people and help people. Empathy is your ability to connect with people, your ability to feel with people. That also means having hard discussions a lot of times, or courageous conversations a lot of times, but doing it empathically. And then social skills, your ability to actually relate to people, converse with people, and so forth. Those drive performance, leadership capability, and well-being. As we look at the neuroscience component, there's been a lot of work in the association between the limbic brain and the cortex, the thinking brain. Simon Sinek actually brought some of this work right into understanding buying decisions. So as an example, I'll talk about Apple computers as one of my favorite companies. My son works at Apple, so I'm a bit biased on it. But when you look at Apple computers versus other computer companies want to sell a product. They'll come out and say, look, this is our new laptop computer. It's very, very fast. It has this new processing chip. It has all this memory. It's got a great keyboard. It's got a great display. As Simon Sinek would say, come buy our laptop. Apple takes a different approach. Apple computers will say, at Apple, in everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. By doing that, we build cool products and services that are simple and easy to use. By the way, they do have fast processing chips. They are sleek. They have good memory. They have a great display. Buy our laptop. It does feel different, and it feels different because What happens in those kinds of situations, in any buying situation, is the information that's coming into your brain is coming into the limbic brain, which is your emotional headquarters. Emotionally, you've already decided that you like that company. And I like that company because they're challenging the status quo and they're cool. And then your cortex starts to justify why you're going to buy that laptop computer from Apple. They're more expensive than everybody else. Now, the other thing that enables you to do when people start buying on who you are, not what you do, but who you are, is that you can actually come out with other products as well. So, as an example, Dell computers came out with MP3 players, but nobody bought MP3 players from Dell. They bought them from Apple. Apple's a computer company. They're not an audio company, but you buy them from Apple. So there's a huge value. That's all driven off of neuroscience. So that's a simple example of how neuroscience can really start to inform us of how we start to sell differently and how we start to drive our businesses differently. Okay, so let's go to mindfulness now. So the Moogie Boogie guru side of this stuff, right? Actually, it is incredible when you start looking at statistics around this and how it can actually start driving performance in organizations. These are statistics that came out of Google. They were shared through their Search Inside Yourself group and their Mindful Leadership Institute. Average time spent mind wandering in a day, employees estimated that they did that about 47% of the time. So, which you think about that is just out, rather than focused on the task, their minds were wandering 47% of the time. Leaders reported that regularly they were unable to be attentive in meetings 70% of the time. So 70% of the meetings that they were in, at some point in that meeting, they felt that they were unattentive, that they couldn't focus on what was going on. That could be that they're on their phone. That could be that somebody's walking in and interrupting them. It could just be that their mind is wandering. And then lastly, that only 2% of people regularly made time to enhance their personal productivity. So you've got these two huge statistics on one side and a really small statistic on the other side, and actually the development of that. So mindfulness is something that I would encourage everyone to kind of look at as something that could get integrated in. Clear piece in emotional intelligence. So you start to look at all this. All right, so why emotional intelligence? Why is it so important? How do you know that emotional intelligence is important? There is a 60% correlation between an individual or organization's level of emotional intelligence and their level of performance. So very simply, if you increase an organization's level of emotional intelligence, you increase performance. Now, why is that important? Well, this is a very simple way to look at it. It can get really complex if you want to make it complex. I've simplified it down to a simple labor spend, right? Something you can look at on the P&L. A slight increase in performance. If you could come in and you could impact an organization through an engagement and you can increase performance, I mean, almost pick a number, 10% to make it easy. On a $10 million annual labor spend, you could bring $1 million to the bottom line. You can increase net profit by 10%. However, on the other side, it's just as sensitive. So let's say that we've got a situation which is happening everywhere now where we actually have to cut cost in an organization. And by cutting costs, what tends to happen is a bunch of finance guys go up and lock themselves in a room with top leadership. They decide who's going to get let go. They decide who's going to move where, who's going to have to do more work. And they come back, sit down with management, and they say, execute. Management goes out, makes the cuts, does everything that they need to do, which destroys morale in the organization. Now, when that impacts morale in the organization, performance goes down. Absenteeism goes up, unwanted turnover goes up, and performance overall goes down. if that affects performance by 10%, right, which isn't hard to believe, that's a loss of $1 million to the bottom line. So everything we think we just saved, we just lost. Here's what's hard about it. You can actually look at a P&L and make a labor cut and show the $1 million savings to the bottom line. In order to see the impact on the organization, the financial impact on the organization, you have to look at the cost of turnover of that unwanted leave. You have to look at the cost of people being out of there and the lost productivity. You have to look at the cost of performance and what people are not producing and what the overall cost of that is and the increase of overtime and so forth. You have to look at a lot of different line items to actually understand. And even then, it's very ambiguous. So it's very difficult to see it. So black and white, very easy. Let's make cuts. But the end game, you might actually be costing the organization a lot more money. So this is where organizations, I believe, moving forward, are going to have to get a lot better about how they see and how they look and manage their management reporting systems, so they can actually get very clear pictures of these things. All right, so let's look at emotional intelligence tools and how they actually work and how they can actually benefit the organization. We use the 6 seconds model. 6 seconds is the largest EQ organization globally. Their model works in 3 primary areas that aligns to the 5 kind of primary areas of emotional intelligence that we talked about, and those break down into these 3 categories. The first category is know yourself. So really, it's what we do, right? So it's going to include things like emotional literacy and your navigating, it's recognition of patterns and those kinds of things. And we'll get into some of the specifics around each one of those. Then it's choose yourself. This is about self-management. So the first area, know, self-awareness. Choose, self-management or self-regulation. And the give, the green ring there, is why we do it. This is purpose. And purpose is really, almost think of it as a sailboat going through the ocean, and that big weight in the bottom of it that's the ballast that keeps that sailboat upright. So it's really the thing that keeps you going in the right direction all the time, right? So that's your purpose. So why you do what you do. Now, these models look at least the 6 seconds model in success factors. And these are important for leadership for sure, but they're important for any employee. So things like, as an example, that we can now measure, and imagine having this. You can look at this in your hiring or in your development. Somebody's influence, we can actually measure that. Their decision-making ability. All of those wrapped up in effectiveness, overall effectiveness. Relationships includes their community and their network. So what is their ability to actually build community? What is their ability to actually build network around them? Their quality of life includes their achievements and how they feel about those achievements, and their satisfaction. Satisfaction in life, satisfaction in the job. And their well-being. That's their balance, work-life balance, and it's their health. Now, and health becomes really important because if I'm not healthy, then obviously I'm going to be sick more often. I'm not going to be performing at my peak and so forth. So we can now actually look at these things as success factors, and clearly all of these are important for leadership. Now, the capabilities breakdown for each of these areas it starts to get kind of interesting. So in the know yourself area, it's emotional literacy and it's recognition of patterns, those 2 things. In the choose yourself area, this is now moving into self-management instead of self-awareness or awareness, is consequential thinking, your ability to navigate emotions when you get triggered, your intrinsic motivation, and your optimism. And then the give yourself out area that we talked about is, they call it noble goal. That's your purpose and empathy. So your ability, again, to connect with people. Now, in looking at someone's profile, we can actually now look at these competencies and understand a little bit about it. This is an example. So with emotional literacy, navigating emotions, and empathy, we can actually see a person's emotional state and how well they're going to deal with emotive situations. With optimism, consequential thinking, and recognition of patterns, we can actually see people's decision-making ability. And with intrinsic motivation, optimism, and noble goal, we can see what drive they have. This person, as an example, they're going to be at work. I don't care how sick they are. They're going to work. They're off the charts in all three of those things. They have high drive. Now, that's important to know, but they also are very low in navigating emotions. So we know that this person is likely going to be emotive if they get triggered. So working with them to be able to have more self-control will be important, as an example. If they were low in consequential thinking, you might say, even with this, there's a full deviation difference. You could say they're likely going to look at decision-making with rose-colored glasses because their optimism is so high, they're going to feel they can accomplish anything. Not a bad thing if it's a salesperson out there trying to win the hill, but if there's ROI involved or people, implications to people involved, you want to really be able to think through and have good decision-making ability, looking at implications of what if I can't make that hill. So those are the kinds of things that the profiles can actually bring to us. Okay, so we've looked at the pillars, we've looked at the areas. How does that all come together? Because we are living in a world where we have still largely command and control environments. Largely businesses are driven, not largely, they're driven off of economics. You know, organizations have to act, even legally, in their shareholders' best interest. So we need to start looking at this a little different and look at a little bit of a mind shift on this stuff, right? So how does this work? Well, the yellow or orange arrow there is basically the strategy on a page. That's your operating plan, you could say. We've got the purpose at the top, strategy, values, and when we use values, it's not the Girl Scout or Boy Scout oath. Respect, honor, integrity, those are table stakes to be in any company. We're talking about behaviors that are going to drive success. So as an example, it may be growth mindset. That may be a value we're going to hold. It may be customer first that we're going to hold. And then it's the operating initiatives, the very few things as a top level organization we need to focus on, and it kind of breaks down like any other operating plan would break down. The green rings represent a high engagement process in how we're going to bring that to the organization. The executive team and top management will start to set the strategy and direction. Then they'll engage the next level, the mid-management or supervisors, you could say, in saying, look, this is where we're going. These are my personal commitments to achieve that. Now, what is the team going to do here to help the organization and our group now achieve that? And everybody sets their commitments to action down to the individual. So it'll create complete line of sight through the organization. We still need to go through and assess our current realities as we go through and launch this thing. So we've got to look at current realities in an assessment process. We've got to focus the organization on what we're going to do from that once we understand where we have to go. And we have to engage the organization now in how we're going to go do that. The green bands represent that level of engagement, at least in the launch phase of this. Look for quick wins and then drive performance. Now, what's different about this is you'll see that it's circular, and that's because this has to happen on a continuous basis. And purpose and trust in the organization is what is going to provide the energy or the motivation to drive this, rather than the burning platform, or rather than some crises or some major thing that happens in the organization where we have to do that. Safe passage is a term you hear a lot. That we're gonna look at the future state. we're gonna look at the current state. We're going to identify the gap. We're going to create a plan, a safe passage to get from one end to the other. All good stuff, right? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. All good stuff, except that it has to happen on a continuous basis. And that means that we're going to have, starting at the top end, maybe annually we're confronting reality and really doing deep dives into things. Quarterly, we're doing resets on the information that we have available to us. Monthly, we're reviewing things. Weekly, we're setting immediate operating direction. And daily, we're doing huddles and coaching people real time. That is where we probably are at today, globally, for the most part. Different places will be in different ways. There are different phases of evolution around that. And that's going to increase or shorten in durations on each of those things as we go. And we'll need better systems to actually be able to drive that. So again, continuous communication starts to become much more important in this environment. This is a look at a strategy on the page. So the arrow at the top, this is the arrow for Careerlink. And I'll give you a little bit of an example in a couple of these things. So quickly, our purpose is to, that in everything we do, we believe in bringing out the greatness in the people and organizations we touch. Right? So that's our purpose. We do this by aligning people and purpose to maximize performance. And the tools we use are HR services, training, people analytics, coaching, and consulting. So that is the top of our arrow. That's who we are. That's why we're doing what we do. Now, what we're going to go do is in the next pieces down, which is starting to drive the business initiatives and areas of focus. Right? You can see the values there in the middle. Make the complex simple, challenge the status quo, and the growth mindset. And then you drive that thing through the organization, as we just talked about. Now, as we're starting to launch these things, it's going to be a process because a lot of organizations are not there yet. We're going to have to launch them, and then we're going to have to integrate that through the organization so it just becomes part of their DNA. It just becomes the way that they do business, right? Now, as you work through that, though, people get afraid, so people will be in fear. They start to get frustration. They start to make judgments about things. That's where we don't want people. We want people motivated. We want people building trust with our leadership. That all comes from purpose and aligning purpose. And if we can do that, we can keep people up in excitement, having the courage to actually make change, and living in curiosity, which is all about that growth mindset. So the pillars that we're putting in place, for the most part, are huge benefits in keeping people up on that top outside ring, the excitement, the courage, and the curiosity. So, so that's the change model, and putting that all together will look something a little bit like this, where we're building the organization literally through the culture and DNA around purpose, growth mindset, and emotional intelligence. And it's woven into everything that we're doing. And we can overlay, and it doesn't have to be this methodology, it can be some other methodology of change, but it has to be continuous. It has to be something that's happening on an ongoing basis. It needs to be something that's driven off of purpose, not crises, because change needs to happen too quickly. And typical change initiatives have happened because organizations have gotten out of alignment with the marketplace. They need to go do research, figure out what the market wants, and get back into alignment. There's just no time for that anymore. You have to stay in alignment with the marketplace. So systems need to be put in place to do that. And then we need to have the organization ready to change with it. So we've got some time for questions. If anybody would like to type into your chat box any questions that you might have, then I'd be happy to respond to those. So we'll give people just a minute. I think we have about, we have about 8 minutes left. So if anyone's got questions about anything that I've been talking about, why don't you throw a question in and we'll address it. All right, seems like we don't have questions. So that's great. Then we'll go ahead and end the session today. I think our next session is coming up in early December on the 10th, and that'll be with Angela Giacomis, talking about I think her experiences with Google and mindfulness that she had just 2 weeks ago. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending. And if you guys have questions about anything that was said, everybody has my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll address them as quickly as I can. Thanks so much.